Your craft is dead. Get out of this house." Those were the words my own son said to me as he shoved $500 into my palm and told me to disappear before sunrise. Not because I had done anything wrong, not because I had raised my voice or overstayed some invisible welcome, but because his pregnant wife wanted my bedroom for a home office, and my presence made her uncomfortable. After 46 years of raising him, of teaching him to hold a screwdriver before he could hold a pencil, of building a name that once meant something in every auction house on the eastern seaboard, that was my final value. $500 and a closed door. He thought discarding me like a broken gear would be the end of my story. But time has a way of circling back. What my son did not know was that in just 8 months, he would be sitting across from me in the very shop where I taught him his first repair, listening to the steady tick of a clock we built together, and begging me to save him from the ruins of everything he destroyed. Welcome back to Family Revenge Stories, and thank you for clicking on this video. Before we continue, pause for a moment and leave a comment. Where are you watching from today? And what is the weather like right now? Your comments build this community more than you know. Also, please note this story includes fictional elements added for entertainment and educational purposes. Any resemblance to real names or settings is purely coincidental. But the message is real, and it is meant to stay with you. Let me take you back 3 hours before those words shattered everything. The kitchen smelled like rosemary and slow-cooked lamb. Eleanor's recipe. My late wife had written it on a yellow index card 30 years ago, her handwriting slanting to the right the way it always did when she was excited about a dish. I found the card tucked inside her cookbook 3 weeks after she passed. Standing at that stove, following her instructions, was the closest I could get to hearing her voice again. I had been cooking since 3 in the afternoon, browning the meat until it formed a golden crust, chopping vegetables into precise, even pieces. Rosemary, thyme, a splash of red wine. This was not just dinner. This was my language. The only way I still knew how to say I love you in a house that had stopped listening. Smells amazing, Dad. My son Ethan's voice drifted from the living room, hollow. The kind of compliment you offer without looking up from your screen. He was on the couch, laptop on his knees, fingers flying across the keyboard, selling watches online. That was what he had turned my life's work into. Brennan and Time. The restoration shop I built over 46 years was now an e-commerce page pushing fashion watches to strangers who would never know the difference between a movement and a battery. I set the table carefully. 3 places. Eleanor's wedding plates, cloth napkins, a small vase of flowers from the market on King Street. I wanted tonight to feel like family. Megan came downstairs slowly, one hand on her back, the other on her belly. 7 months pregnant. My first grandchild. I should have felt nothing but joy. Instead, I felt a quiet dread I could not name. Arthur, is this gluten-free? She held the bread basket away from her body, like it might contaminate her. Just sourdough. I can make you something else. She set it down with a sigh loud enough to fill the room. Ethan, I told you about my dietary needs. Did you even mention it to him? Ethan closed his laptop. Dad, we talked about this. We had not. I would have remembered. My memory was fine. The doctor confirmed it last month. But lately, conversations I had no recollection of kept multiplying. Decisions made on my behalf without my input. I was beginning to wonder if the forgetting was theirs, not mine. Sorry, I muttered, turning back to the stove. I will make rice. I stood there boiling water, feeling their silence press against my spine. This house, the one I helped Ethan buy 4 years ago with my retirement savings, the one I moved into after Eleanor died because he said he wanted me close, used to feel like home. Now it felt like I was renting space in my own son's life. We ate in near silence. Ethan scrolled his phone between bites. Megan rearranged the lamb on her plate without eating. I tried to remember the last time either of them asked how I was doing. I could not. Then Megan set down her fork. Arthur, We need to discuss something. Not Dad. Arthur. Like I was a tenant, being called into the landlord's office. Ethan put his phone face down. For the first time all evening, he looked at me. His eyes were hard. Decided. The baby's room, Megan began, hands folded over her belly. We need your bedroom. It has the best light, the most closet space. I need part of it for a home office after the baby comes. I kept my voice steady. Where would I go? Ethan leaned forward. Dad, this is not working. You being here. It is too much. Too much. I cooked every night. Cleaned the kitchen, the bathrooms, the floors. Paid for groceries more often than not. Fixed every leaky faucet in this house with hands that had restored timepieces for presidents and museum curators. What was too much about any of that? I do not understand, son. You are a burden, Dad. His voice cracked, but he pushed through it. Your craft is dead. Nobody pays to fix old clocks anymore. You are a liability. We need space. We need privacy. We need you to leave. The room tilted. My knuckles went white against Eleanor's wedding plates. Megan did not flinch. Ethan stood, walked to the counter, pulled out his wallet, and counted $500 bills. He laid them on the table next to the flowers I had bought that morning. Find a motel. Find an apartment. I do not care. But you need to be gone by morning. Morning. That was not even 12 hours. I stared at the money. $500. 46 years of fatherhood reduced to a stack of bills thinner than the bread she would not eat. Outside, rain began tapping the kitchen window. Eleanor used to love that sound. She would stand right there, coffee in hand, smiling like the sky was telling her a secret. I picked up the bills, folded them carefully, and stood. My legs felt weak, but they held. They had carried me through 46 years of early mornings and late nights in workshops. They could carry me through this. I walked toward the bedroom that would be a nursery by the end of the week. Behind me, the rain grew louder, and not a single voice called me back. The bedroom door closed behind me with a soft click. Such a small sound for such a final thing. I stood in the middle of the room that had been mine for 4 years and would be a nursery by Friday. The walls still held faint marks where Eleanor's watercolor paintings had hung before Megan asked me to take them down. Too depressing, she had said. They were landscapes of the South Carolina coast, painted by a woman who saw beauty in everything, even storms. I had stored them under the bed like secrets. I pulled my 2 suitcases from the closet. Old leather, scuffed at the corners, brass latches that still clicked with precision. Eleanor and I bought them for our honeymoon in Savannah 42 years ago. They had carried our best memories across state lines. Now they would carry everything I had left. Clothes first. I did not own much. A few button-downs, slacks, 2 pairs of shoes. Then the photograph of Eleanor on our wedding day, laughing with her head tilted back, sunlight catching the pearls at her throat. I wrapped it in a wool sweater and placed it between the folded shirts where nothing could crush it. Then the 2 things that mattered most. My father's restoration kit. A leather roll, dark with age, containing tools that had been in the Brennan family for 3 generations. Loops, tweezers, screwdrivers so small they looked like they belonged to a surgeon. My father had placed this kit in my hands when I was 14 years old. Every tool you will ever need is in here, Arthur, he told me. Respect them, and they will never fail you. I had carried it for 56 years. It had never failed me once. And beside it, the clock, a walnut-cased pendulum clock, 9 inches tall, with a brass face and Roman numerals. 25 years ago, Ethan and I had restored it together. He was 9. His hands were too small for most of the tools, but he held the gears with such care, such focus, that I knew he understood. We worked on it for 3 weekends. When the pendulum swung for the first time and the tick filled our workshop, Ethan had looked up at me with enormous eyes and said, "Dad, we made time come back to life." I had never been prouder of anything in my entire career. The clock still ran perfectly. 25 years, and it had not lost a second. I wrapped it in Eleanor's favorite scarf, placed it on top of the suitcase, and sat on the edge of the bed. The rain was louder now, hammering the roof, streaming down the window in silver veins. And Eleanor's voice filled my head. Not a memory. Exactly. Something deeper. Something she had given me 2 years ago, in a hospital room that smelled like antiseptic and fading lavender. The machines had been turned off an hour before. Her request. Just me and Catherine and the rain against the window. Always rain when the worst things happened. Arthur. Her voice was barely a whisper. I had to lean so close. My forehead nearly touched hers. I need to tell you something before I go. You need to rest, sweetheart. No. Her hand found mine. Her grip was startlingly strong for someone who weighed less than 90 pounds. Ethan. He is not yours. Not biologically. I did not pull away. Did not flinch. Did not gasp. I know, I said quietly. Her eyes went wide. Tears spilled down her temples into the pillow. You knew? Since the beginning. I saw the dates, Eleanor. I did the math. But it never mattered then. It does not matter now. She was shaking. Why did you never say anything? I smoothed her hair the way I had done every night for 40 years. Because he is mine. I was there at 2 in the morning when he could not sleep. I taught him to hold a screwdriver, to read a clock face, to be patient with things that are broken. I scared the monsters from under his bed. I held him when you were too tired. Blood does not make a father, Eleanor. Showing up every single day makes a father. She was sobbing now, thin shoulders trembling against the hospital gown. I was so scared you would leave if you knew. I was so terrified. I would never leave you. Or him. He is my son. He is our son. Promise me. She gripped my hand with the last of her strength. Promise me you will never tell him. It would destroy him, Arthur. He idolizes you. If he found out the truth, it would break something that can never be repaired. I promise. I pressed my forehead to hers, breathed in the faint trace of her lavender soap beneath the hospital smell. He is my boy. That is all he needs to know. That is all I need to know. She smiled then. Peaceful for the first time in weeks. You are a better man than I deserved. Arthur Brennan. No, sweetheart. You deserve the world. I just gave you what I could. 3 hours later, she was gone. And I kept my promise. I had kept it every day since. I came back to the present. The bedroom. The suitcases. The rain. The muffled silence of a house that had just thrown me away. I lifted the bags off the bed. They felt heavier than they should have. Not from what was inside, just clothes, tools, a clock, a photograph. But from what they represented, 70 years reduced to 2 pieces of luggage. I opened the bedroom door and stepped into the hallway. The stairs creaked under my weight. How many times had I climbed these stairs? Thousands. Always with purpose. Carrying groceries, helping Ethan move furniture, rushing down when Eleanor called me for dinner. Now, I was descending them for the last time, and no one cared. Their bedroom door was closed, a thin line of light underneath. They were awake. They knew I was leaving. Neither of them came out. At the bottom of the stairs, I set the suitcases down by the front door. My hands were shaking. I reached for the doorknob, and Eleanor's face flashed behind my eyes. That smile in the hospital. That final piece. I opened the door. The rain hit me like a wall. Cold, relentless. It soaked through my jacket before I stepped off the porch. I walked down the driveway, one slow step at a time. The suitcases knocked against my shins. Halfway down, I felt it. Eyes on my back. Was Ethan watching from the upstairs window? I did not turn around. If I looked back and saw regret, I did not know what I would do. And if I looked back and saw nothing, That would be worse. At the end of the driveway, I stopped, turned around one last time. The house glowed warm through the curtain of rain. I had helped build that porch. I had painted Ethan's first bedroom. I had held Eleanor in that living room the night the doctor said there was nothing more they could do. Eleanor, I whispered to the rain and the darkness. Our son just broke my heart. The porch light went out. Then the living room. Then the upstairs. Darkness swallowed the house whole. I turned away and started walking. The bus station was 6 blocks north. The rain erased my footprints behind me, as if I had never been there at all. The Greyhound station smelled like burnt coffee and diesel fuel. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in a sickly yellow that made the living look half dead. I stood at the ticket counter with my 2 suitcases at my feet, restoration kit slung over my shoulder, and $500 in my jacket pocket. Everything my son had decided I was worth. The clerk was a young woman, maybe 25, with tired eyes and acrylic nails that clicked against her keyboard. She did not look up. Where to? I opened my mouth and realized I had no answer. I had walked 6 blocks in the rain, without a single thought about where I was going. Portland. Chicago. Nowhere. Every direction was the same when no one was waiting for you at the other end. Where can I get to for under $50? She glanced up then, really looked at me. Soaked jacket, gray hair plastered flat, 2 old suitcases that belonged in a museum. She knew exactly what kind of passenger I was. The kind who buys the cheapest ticket to wherever, because anywhere is better than here. Savannah, Georgia. Leaves in 40 minutes. Gate 3. I slid the bills across the counter. She printed the ticket without another word. I thanked her. She nodded once. And something in her expression softened for just a moment before the next customer stepped forward and I became invisible again. The bus was less than half full. I took a window seat near the back, shoved my suitcases into the overhead rack, and sank into the cracked vinyl. My body ached. Not from the weight of the bags. From the weight of the last 8 hours. From the weight of a life that had collapsed so quickly I was still waiting for someone to tell me it was a mistake. The engine rumbled. The bus lurched forward, and Charleston began to disappear behind me. Street lamps blurred past the rain-streaked glass. I pressed my forehead against the cold window and closed my eyes. You are a burden, Dad. Your craft is dead. Ethan's voice played on a loop I could not silence. I had raised him, fed him, taught him everything I knew. I had placed my tools in his hands, the way my father had placed them in mine. And in the end, I was a line item he could not justify, an expense to be cut. Maybe he was right. The thought crept in like cold water through a cracked window. Maybe I was a burden. I was 70 years old. My wife was dead. My shop was gone. I had no income. No savings beyond what was left of $500. No plan. What exactly did I have to offer the world? The bus stopped in a small town outside of Walterboro. A few passengers got off. An old man got on, maybe 80, wearing a corduroy jacket 2 sizes too large and carrying a canvas bag that sagged with the weight of whatever was inside. He shuffled down the aisle, scanning for an empty seat, and I caught his eye. Here, I said, gesturing to the seat beside me. Plenty of room. He lowered himself down with the careful precision of someone whose joints had stopped cooperating years ago. Thank you, sir. Name is Earl. Arthur. We sat in comfortable silence for a while. Earl dozed, his head nodding forward every few minutes before snapping back up. At one point, something shifted in his jacket. A glint of gold. I looked closer and saw it. A pocket watch. Old, tarnished. Tucked into his breast pocket. The chain dangled loose, swaying with the motion of the bus. It was slipping. Slowly, inch by inch, gravity was pulling it free. I reached over and caught it just as it slid from the pocket. The metal was warm from his body heat. I held it carefully, the way you hold something that belongs to someone else's soul. Earl startled awake. His eyes went wide when he saw the watch in my hand. "Oh Lord." He snatched it back gently, pressing it against his chest. "Thank you. That was my father's. Only thing I have left of him. Does it still run?" He shook his head slowly. "Stopped about 15 years ago. Took it to 3 different shops. Nobody could fix it. They all said the movement was too old. Parts do not exist anymore." He looked down at the watch, rubbing the case with his thumb. "I keep it anyway. Sometimes I hold it to my ear and pretend I can still hear him in there." My fingers twitched. I could feel the diagnosis forming in my hands before my brain caught up. A Waltham, probably 1890s, based on the case style. Likely a mainspring issue or a worn pivot. Nothing I could not fix with the right tools and an hour of patience. The words were on my tongue. "I could fix that for you." But I swallowed them. What was the point? My craft was dead. My son had said so. And who was I to argue? A 70-year-old man on a Greyhound bus with no home and no destination. Earl tucked the watch back into his pocket, patted it twice and closed his eyes again. I turned to the window. South Carolina had become Georgia. Pine forests stretched endlessly on both sides of the highway, dark and dripping from the rain that had followed me south. The sky was the color of ash. Am I really worthless? The question circled my mind like a vulture over something it was not sure had stopped breathing yet. I had worked every day since I was 14. Apprentice, journeyman, master horologist, shop owner. 56 years with my hands inside the most delicate machines ever invented by humankind. I had restored clocks for the Smithsonian. I had rebuilt a 1700s long case for the governor's mansion. I had trained 11 apprentices who went on to open their own shops, and my own son said my craft was dead. Or maybe, a quieter voice said from somewhere deeper, maybe your son just forgot how to read the time. The bus pulled into Savannah just after 7 in the evening. The city was gray and dripping. Live oaks trailing Spanish moss, like old women trailing scarves. Beautiful, in a haunted kind of way. I grabbed my suitcases and stepped off the bus into a place I had only visited once 42 years ago with Eleanor on our honeymoon. She had loved this city. The cobblestones, the squares, the way the light came through the oak canopy like stained glass. I had promised to bring her back someday. I never did. I stopped an older woman walking a small dog beneath a large umbrella. "Excuse me, ma'am. Is there a shelter nearby? Somewhere I can stay tonight?" She studied me for a moment. Then her face softened. "Hope House. About 8 blocks east on Abercorn. They help folks who need a fresh start." I thanked her and started walking. Always walking. 8 blocks through wet streets, lined with historic homes glowing warm behind tall windows. Families inside. Laughter. The sound of television. All the ordinary miracles I no longer had. Hope House was a 2-story brick building on a quiet corner. The paint on the sign was peeling, but the porch light was on, warm yellow through the glass door. Inside, I could hear voices, quiet conversation, the clink of dishes being washed. I stood on the sidewalk, rain dripping from my hair, suitcases at my feet, and stared at the door. Behind it was a world I never imagined entering. A world where 70-year-old men slept in borrowed beds and filled out forms that asked for emergency contacts they did not have. But the porch light was on. And sometimes, that is enough. I picked up my bags and walked inside. The woman behind the front desk looked like she had seen every version of rock bottom and still believed in second chances. 60 years old, dark-skinned, silver-streaked hair pulled back in a low bun, reading glasses on the tip of her nose. Her name tag read Gloria Washington, Program Director. She studied my face for 2 seconds and understood everything without asking. "First time?" "Yes, ma'am." She slid a clipboard across the table. "I am Gloria. Welcome to Hope House. Fill this out. Dinner is almost finished, but I will save you a plate." The form was simple. Name. Date of birth. Previous address. Medical conditions. Emergency contact. I filled the first four with steady handwriting. The kind my father insisted upon, because a man who cannot write clearly cannot think clearly. Then I reached the last line. Emergency contact. I thought of Ethan. His number was still memorized the way certain things are memorized, not by choice, but by repetition. I had dialed it 10,000 times across 34 years. I left the line blank. Gloria did not comment. She handed me a blanket, a toiletry kit, and a key on a wooden tag burned with the number 12. Second floor. End of the hall. Lights out at 10. She paused. And Mr. Brennan, we are glad you are here. The room was small. 2 bunk beds, a window overlooking a courtyard garden. One lower bunk was occupied by a sleeping man whose boots stood at attention beside the bed, laces tucked inside, military style. I set my suitcases against the wall, placed my restoration kit on the open mattress, and sat down. The springs groaned. The pillow smelled like industrial detergent. Downstairs, the dining room held maybe 40 people at long folding tables. Men and women, most over 50. Some talked quietly. Some stared at nothing. The air smelled like canned soup and toast. And beneath that, something harder to name. The particular silence of people who have stopped expecting things to improve. I took my plate to a corner seat. Vegetable soup, white bread, an apple. I was lifting the spoon when a voice cut through the room. New guy. Corner table. What is your story? A man in a wheelchair rolled toward me with the easy confidence of someone who owned whatever space he occupied. 73. Maybe older. Weathered face. Forearms ropey with old muscle. A faded Marine Corps tattoo peeked beneath his rolled sleeve. And in his left hand, held against his chest like a talisman, was a pocket watch. Gold once, now tarnished. Crystal scratched and cloudy. Chain broken and knotted back together. He held it like it was the most valuable thing in the world. Walter Briggs, he said, parking across from me. 23 years Marine Corps. 2 tours Vietnam. Currently between addresses. He grinned, but it did not reach his eyes. You? Arthur Brennan. I was a watchmaker. Walter raised an eyebrow. You fix clocks? I used to. Something flickered across his face. He glanced at the pocket watch, then tucked it back against his chest. Well, Arthur, the watchmaker, welcome to the bottom. Food is terrible, but free. Company is better than you would expect. A younger man appeared at the edge of our table. 28. Thin, dark circles under his eyes. His hands trembled at his sides. The kind of tremor that comes from something chemical leaving the body. Tommy, Walter said without turning. Sit down. This is Arthur. Arthur. Tommy Reeves. 4 months clean. Bravest kid in this building. Tommy sat without making eye contact. His fingers drummed the table, and I noticed his wrist. A digital watch. Cheap. Gas station kind. The screen was blank. Dead. But he wore it anyway, the way people carry things that have stopped working because letting go feels worse than holding on. After dinner, I helped clear plates. In the kitchen, a clock hung above the serving window. Standard, institutional, white face, black numbers. Stopped at 4:17. No one had bothered to fix it. Walking back through the common room, I saw more. A cuckoo clock on a shelf with its pendulum missing. A mantel clock beside the television with a cracked face and no hands. A grandmother clock in the hallway. Beautiful walnut case, silent as a coffin. Every clock in Hope House was broken. Time had stopped in this place. Not metaphorically. Literally. And no one had noticed or cared enough to do anything about it. I climbed to my bunk. My roommate had not moved. His boots still stood at attention. I changed, lay down on the thin mattress, pulled the blanket to my chin. The building settled around me. Pipes ticking. Someone coughing 2 rooms over. Gloria locking the front door. Hallway lights clicking off one by one. And then, from inside my restoration kit on the mattress beside me, a sound. Small, steady, faithful. Tick, tick, tick. The pendulum clock. The one Ethan and I restored together when he was 9 years old. Still running in the darkness, counting seconds no one else could hear. 25 years, and it had not missed a beat. I lay there listening. The sound filled the silence, the way a single candle fills a dark room. Not much, but enough to prove the darkness is not total. Time has not given up on me, I thought. Not yet. Sleep came slowly, carried on the rhythm of the only clock in Hope House that still worked. I woke before dawn. Gray light through the window. The courtyard garden was wet with dew, and a mockingbird sang from somewhere in the oak tree. I dressed quietly, went downstairs, stepped onto the front porch. Walter was already there, his wheelchair parked at the edge, facing east, where the first orange line of sunrise was cutting through the live oaks. He was holding the pocket watch, not looking at it, holding it against his ear, eyes closed, head tilted, listening for a tick that would not come, waiting for his father's heartbeat to start again in a machine that had been silent for 15 years. He did not see me. I stood in the doorway watching a 73-year-old Marine hold a broken clock to his ear and wait for the dead to speak. My hand tightened around the strap of my restoration kit. I knew what I had to do. I did not ask permission. I just walked out onto the porch, sat down on the bench beside his wheelchair, and said 3 words that changed everything. "May I see that watch?" Walter's eyes opened. He looked at me, then down at the pocket watch pressed against his chest. For a long moment, he did not move. The watch was not just a machine to him. It was a reliquary, a sealed chamber containing the last echo of a man who had been dead for 30 years. "You said you were a watchmaker," he said slowly. "I am a watchmaker." Something in my voice must have convinced him, because he extended his hand. The watch lay in his palm, tarnished gold, catching the first light of morning. I took it with both hands, the way you receive something sacred, and brought it close. A Waltham, 1896, if I had to guess. Open face, lever set, 15 jewels. The case was dented at the crown, and the crystal was scratched, nearly opaque. But the engraving on the back was still legible. "To my son, may you always find your way home." I turned it over, pressed the release, and the case back opened with a soft click. The movement inside was frozen. Dust on the balance wheel. A mainspring coiled too tight, probably seized from years of humidity and neglect. One pivot was visibly worn, but the bones were there. Every gear, every jewel, every bridge, still intact. This watch was not dead. It was sleeping. "I need a few things," I said. Walter watched as I went inside and came back with my restoration kit. A paperclip from Gloria's desk and a magnifying glass I found in the children's book corner. The paperclip I bent into a fine-tipped tool for adjusting the hairspring. The magnifying glass would have to serve as my loop. Not ideal. But I had worked with worse. I sat back down on the bench, opened the leather kit, and laid the tools across my knee. Walter said nothing. He just watched. Behind us, the screen door creaked. I glanced back. Tommy stood in the doorway, arms crossed, eyes fixed on my hands. He did not come closer, but he did not leave. I began. First, the mainspring. I released the tension carefully, tooth by tooth, until the coil relaxed. Then I cleaned the balance wheel with a soft cloth, removing 30 years of dust with strokes so gentle they barely disturbed the air. The pivot was worn but not broken. I polished it with the edge of a linen handkerchief, rotating it slowly until the surface found its smoothness again. Minutes passed. Or hours. I could not tell. When I worked, time became irrelevant, which was always the great irony of my profession. The world narrowed to the space between my fingertips. The birds in the oak tree disappeared. The smell of Gloria's coffee from the kitchen disappeared. There was only the watch, the light, and the silence. I reassembled the movement, set the mainspring tension, adjusted the hairspring with the bent paperclip, a technique my father had taught me when I was 15 and too impatient to wait for proper tools. Patience is the only tool that never breaks, Arthur, he used to say. Remember that when everything else fails you? I closed the case back, held the watch level, and with my thumbnail, I gave the crown one slow, firm wind. Nothing. Then, tick, a pause. The whole porch held its breath. Tick, tick, tick. Steady, clear, alive. The balance wheel swung in its arc, the escapement released and caught, and the sound filled the morning air like a heartbeat returning from the dead. I held the watch out to Walter. He did not take it immediately. He stared at it, lips parted, eyes wide. The tough, weathered Marine who had survived 2 tours in Vietnam and 23 years of service looked at that ticking pocket watch like a man seeing a ghost. Then he took it. Slowly. Both hands. He raised it to his ear. The sound that came from Walter Briggs was not a word. It was something older than words. A sound from the bottom of his chest that climbed through his throat and broke open against the morning. His shoulders shook. His jaw clenched. Then released. Then clenched again. Tears cut lines down his weathered cheeks. "That is my father's heartbeat," he whispered. "I have not heard it in 15 years. You brought him back to me." Behind us, Tommy made a sound. I turned. He was still in the doorway, arms no longer crossed. They hung at his sides, and his face was wet. He wiped his eyes with the back of his trembling hand and looked away. Embarrassed. But he did not leave. I looked at Walter. At the watch pressed against his ear. At the tears on his face. And I understood something I had been too broken to see for weeks. "Time does not die," I said quietly. "It just waits for someone to care enough to bring it back." Walter could not speak. He just nodded, holding the watch, listening. Word traveled through Hope House the way warmth travels through old brick. Slowly, and then all at once. By noon, 3 people had found me in the common room. A woman named Pearl brought a mantel clock that had belonged to her grandmother. A man named Curtis handed me a wristwatch his wife had given him on their wedding day, silent for 8 years. A younger woman whose name I never learned placed a small travel alarm on the table and said simply, "It was my daughter's." Without explaining further, I fixed them all, one by one, using my father's tools and whatever I could improvise from Gloria's supply closet. Each time the tick returned, something shifted in the room. A smile, a tear, a straightening of the shoulders. These were not just machines. They were containers of memory. And when the sound came back, so did something that had been missing from the people who carried them. By the end of the week, I had repaired 11 clocks. Gloria found me that evening in the common room, cleaning my tools under the lamp. She stood in the doorway with her arms folded, studying me the way she had studied me that first night. Except now, her expression was different. Softer, almost reverent. "Mr. Brennan," she said, "how many more can you fix?" I looked around the room. The cuckoo clock on the shelf, still missing its pendulum. The grandmother clock in the hallway, still silent. Tommy's dead wristwatch. The institutional clock in the kitchen, still frozen at 4:17. All of them. I said, "If you will let me." She smiled. A real smile. Warm and full. "Welcome to the team, Mr. Brennan. Stay as long as you need." I nodded. Looked down at my hands. The same hands Ethan had called a burden. The same hands that had just given a Marine his father's heartbeat back. For the first time in weeks, I did not wonder whether I was worthless. I already had my answer. I had been at Hope House for 3 weeks when the woman with the emerald earrings walked in and everything changed. 17 clocks. That was how many I had repaired since Walter's pocket watch. 17 machines brought back from silence, and with them, 17 people who stood a little straighter, smiled a little easier, held their heads a little higher. The grandmother clock in the hallway now chimed on the hour. The kitchen clock read the correct time for the first time in years. Even the cuckoo clock worked again, though its cuckoo sounded more like a hiccup, which made Tommy laugh every time it went off. I was sitting at my usual spot in the common room, the folding table by the window where the morning light was best, working on the most challenging piece I had encountered since arriving. A long case clock movement, over 200 years old, donated by a Savannah family who had found it in their attic and brought it to Gloria, thinking someone might want it for parts. The fusee chain was broken, the escape wheel was missing 2 teeth, and the mainspring had crystallized from age. Most watchmakers would have called it scrap. I called it Tuesday. I was deep inside the movement. Using a sewing needle I had sharpened on the concrete step outside as a makeshift pivot tool, when I became aware of someone watching me. Not the casual glances I had grown accustomed to from the residents. This was different. Focused. Patient. The kind of watching that understands what it is seeing. I looked up. She stood near the doorway, maybe 15 feet away. 52, elegantly dressed, without being ostentatious. Dark hair pulled back, a silk scarf at her throat, and at her ears, 2 emerald studs that caught the window light and threw tiny green sparks across the wall. She held a leather portfolio in one hand and a donation box in the other, but both had been forgotten. She was watching my hands. 20 minutes she stood there. I know because the kitchen clock, the one I had fixed the previous week, chimed twice during her observation. I did not acknowledge her, not out of rudeness, but because the escape wheel required my full attention. One wrong move and 2 centuries of craftsmanship would be lost. When I finally set down my tools, she crossed the room. "That is an 1800s English fusee movement," she said. "Not a question. A statement. And you are repairing it with a sewing needle and a magnifying glass from a children's book corner." I looked at her. "It works. It should not." She sat down across from me without being invited, the way people do when they have already decided the conversation is going to happen. What you just did would take most certified horologists a full workshop and a week. You did it in 2 hours with improvised tools, in a room that smells like canned soup. I wiped my hands on the cloth. "And you know the difference between a fusee movement and a modern one, which means you are not here to drop off donations." She smiled. Not a polite smile. A real one. Sharp and warm at the same time. "Nadia Farouk. I own Heritage Auction House. We handle fine timepieces, antiques, estate collections. Offices in Savannah, Charleston, Atlanta." "Arthur Brennan. I know who you are, Mr. Brennan. Gloria told me about you last week. She said a watchmaker showed up with nothing but a toolkit and started bringing clocks back from the dead. I thought she was exaggerating. She was not. I did not know what to say to that, so I said nothing." Nadia set her portfolio on the table, but she did not open it. Instead, she leaned forward, and her voice changed. The business polish fell away, and underneath was something raw. "My father was a jeweler," she said, "in Cairo. He was the finest goldsmith on his street, maybe in the whole district. People came from across the city for his work. When I was 12, he moved us to America because he believed this country rewarded craftsmanship." She paused. "He was wrong. A business partner cheated him out of his shop within 2 years. He spent the rest of his life working in a factory, assembling cheap costume jewelry on an assembly line. The same hands that had created masterpieces in gold were gluing rhinestones onto tin." I watched her face. The emerald earrings caught the light again, and I understood. Her father had made them. They were the last pieces of his real work that she still carried. He died when I was 16. She continued. 61 years old. Heart failure. In a one-bedroom apartment that smelled like soldering flux. I found his toolkit under the bed. I kept it. I built everything I have because of what he taught me. And I swore I would never let another craftsman die forgotten because the world decided their skill was obsolete. The room was very quiet. Walter had stopped reading his newspaper. Tommy had looked up from the jigsaw puzzle he was working on in the corner. "Mr. Brennan," Nadia said, straightening. "I have a proposition. I own a property in the historic district. 2,200 square feet. Street level. Beautiful bones. It has been vacant for 8 months. I want to turn it into a restoration workshop. High-end clients on weekdays, museum-grade work, estate collections. And every Sunday, free repairs for anyone who walks in with a broken clock and a story. No questions asked." She met my eyes. "I am prepared to invest $450,000. Renovations, equipment, 6 months of operating expenses. 60-40 equity. You run it. I fund it. And you hire your staff from here. From Hope House. Give them real wages, real training, real futures." The number hung in the air. $450,000. I was a 70-year-old man sleeping in a community shelter, repairing clocks with bent paper clips, and this woman was offering me nearly $500,000. "Why me?" I asked. "Because you fix things that matter," she said simply. "Not for money. Not for recognition. Because they deserve to be whole again. I have been searching for 2 years for someone who understands that. You are the first." I looked past her. Through the window, the Savannah morning was gold and green, live oaks dripping Spanish moss, cobblestones gleaming from last night's rain. Walter sat in his wheelchair, pocket watch ticking against his chest. Tommy worked his puzzle, hands steadier than they had been a week ago. Gloria moved through the dining room, straightening chairs, humming something low and hymn-like. These people had given me a second chance when I had nothing. Could I give them the same? I looked back at Nadia, at the emerald earrings her father had made, at the determination in her eyes that I recognized because I had seen it in my own reflection every morning for 46 years. "I will do it," I said. "Not for me. For them." Nadia extended her hand. Her grip was firm, warm, final. "Then we start Monday, Mr. Brennan." She left her business card on the table. Heritage Auction House. Nadia Farouk, founder and CEO. I stared at it for a long time after she left. Walter rolled up beside me. "Who was that?" I picked up the card. "Either the best thing that has ever happened to me, or the craziest." Walter grinned. "At our age, those are usually the same thing." From the corner, Tommy spoke without looking up from his puzzle. "Whatever it is," he said quietly, "count me in." I looked at both of them. A 73-year-old Marine in a wheelchair and a 28-year-old kid fighting to stay clean. My first 2 employees. We had a long way to go. The space was 2,200 square feet of raw potential on a cobblestone street in the historic district. Brick walls darkened by a century of Savannah humidity. Arched windows that let in cathedral-quality light. A pressed tin ceiling, original, dented in places but still beautiful. The previous tenant had been an antique dealer who went bankrupt chasing trends instead of honoring craft. The irony was not lost on me. Nadia handed me the keys on a Monday morning in late October. The metal was cold in my palm. I stood in the middle of the empty room, turning slowly, and saw everything it could become. "Restoration benches here," I said, pointing to the wall beneath the arched windows. "Natural light from the east. No horologist worth his tools works under fluorescent. Display cases along the south wall for client pieces awaiting pickup. Reception area near the entrance, warm, inviting. The kind of space that makes people feel their grandmother's clock is in safe hands. Nadia made notes on her phone. And the back? Storage, parts inventory, and a teaching station. Wide table, good lighting, enough room for 3 students to work without bumping elbows. Teaching station, she repeated. You are already thinking about apprentices. That is the whole point. If I fix clocks alone, I fix clocks. If I teach others, I fix lives. She smiled. I am beginning to understand why Gloria calls you a miracle. The renovation took 6 weeks. I was there every day, working alongside the contractors, making sure every detail served the craft. The benches were custom built from reclaimed oak, sanded smooth, fitted with anti-vibration pads. The lighting was warm spectrum, designed to reduce eye strain during 12-hour restoration sessions. I insisted on real wood floors, not laminate, because a workshop should sound alive when you walk through it. While the construction crew worked, I conducted interviews, not in an office. At the folding table in Hope House's common room, because I wanted candidates to feel comfortable, not evaluated. Walter was first. He rolled up to the table, marine posture even in the wheelchair, and looked me dead in the eye. Arthur, I am 73 years old. I have been in this chair for 6 years. Nobody hires men like me. I have sent out 40 applications in the past year. Not one callback. I leaned forward. Walter, I am 70. We will be the oldest workshop in Savannah. We will also be the finest. Apprentice restorer. $18 an hour. Meals every shift. Bus pass. And your name on the wall. His jaw tightened. The way it does when a man is fighting something behind his eyes. He shook my hand so hard the table rattled. Dolores Mitchell came next. 61, soft-spoken, with reading glasses perpetually perched on her forehead, and the kind of warmth that made strangers tell her their life stories within 5 minutes. She had taught 3rd grade for 30 years at a public school in Macon. When the school closed due to budget cuts, she lost her job, then her apartment, then her direction. She had been at Hope House for 4 months. I cannot fix clocks, Mr. Brennan. I should be honest about that. I do not need you to fix clocks, Dolores. I need you to fix the front door. She blinked. The front door? When a person walks into our workshop carrying their grandmother's clock or their father's pocket watch, they are not bringing us a machine. They are bringing us a piece of their heart. I need someone at that door who understands that. Someone who can look them in the eye and say, "Your clock is safe here," and mean it. 30 years of teaching children gave you that gift. I would like to borrow it. She removed her glasses, wiped her eyes, and put them back on. When do I start? Tommy was the hardest interview. He sat across from me with his hands in his lap, hiding the tremor. His eyes stayed on the table. Mr. Brennan, I have to be honest. I have a record. Possession. I have been clean for 4 months, but I still. He stopped. His jaw worked. Tommy, look at me. He raised his eyes. They were terrified. I do not care about your record. I care about your hands. You have been watching me work for 3 weeks. Every time I repair a clock, you move a little closer. Last Tuesday, you stood close enough to see the balance wheel, and you did not look away for 40 minutes. That is not curiosity. That is calling. His lip trembled. Apprentice restorer, I said. Same terms as Walter. You will start with basic disassembly and cleaning. I will teach you everything I know. Show up on time, stay focused, and your hands will find their purpose. I have never had a purpose, he whispered. You do now. Training began in November. Every morning at 7, Walter, Tommy, and Dolores gathered in the workshop while the contractors finished the final details around us. I taught the way my father taught me. No manuals, no shortcuts. Hands and eyes and patience. I started them with a single lesson that I repeated until it became reflex. Every gear matters. I told them. holding a pocket watch movement under the magnifying lamp. Every spring, every pivot, every jewel. If you rush, you break things. If you are patient, you bring them back to life. This is true for clocks. It is also true for people. Walter took to it with military discipline. His hands were steady despite his age, and he approached each clock with the same focus he had once given to assembling a rifle. Precise, methodical, no wasted motion. Tommy struggled. His hands shook. The tiny screws slipped from his tweezers. He dropped a balance wheel on the second day and looked at me like he expected to be fired. I picked it up, inspected it, and handed it back. Try again. Slower this time. He tried again. And again. And again. For 2 weeks he failed more than he succeeded. But he showed up every morning at 6:45, 15 minutes early, and he never once complained. Then, on a Thursday afternoon in the third week of November, something happened. I had given Tommy a simple wristwatch to repair on his own. A 1960s Timex with a broken stem. Entry-level work. The kind of repair I could do blindfolded. I sat at my bench pretending to focus on my own project. But my eyes kept drifting to his station. Tommy opened the case back, removed the stem, cleaned the crown tube. His hands were moving, with a steadiness I had not seen before. Not perfect, but controlled, deliberate. He fitted the new stem, tested the crown, closed the case, wound it, held it to his ear. Tick, tick, tick. He set the watch down and stared at his hands. Turned them over. Palms up, then palms down. His fingers were still. My hands stopped shaking, he said quietly. He looked at me, eyes shining. Mr. Brennan, my hands stopped shaking. That is because they finally have something worth holding, Tommy. He pressed his palms flat on the bench and breathed. In and out. The deepest breath I had ever seen him take. Like a man surfacing after being underwater for a very long time. The day before opening, we hung the sign. Walter held it steady while I drilled. Dolores read the words aloud as each letter caught the Savannah light. Secondhand. Where time gets a second chance. Tommy stood on the sidewalk, looking up at it. He did not say anything. He did not need to. That night, I stood alone in the finished workshop. Benches gleaming, tools arranged, display cases polished. The arched windows reflected the street lamps outside, and the pressed tin ceiling held the warm glow of the Edison bulbs Nadia had chosen. Tomorrow, we open, I said to no one. Tomorrow, we prove that broken things can be beautiful again. I turned off the lights and walked home. For the first time since Eleanor died, I was not walking away from something. I was walking toward it. The morning we opened secondhand, Savannah gave us a sky so blue it looked like someone had polished it overnight. I stood on the sidewalk at 6:45, holding a cup of coffee that had already gone cold, staring at the sign above the door. The gold letters caught the early light, and for a moment, I could not breathe. Not because of fear, because of something I had not felt in a long time. Pride. Walter rolled his wheelchair to the front window and positioned himself behind the display case we had spent 3 days arranging. 12 restored clocks sat on black velvet, each one ticking in its own rhythm, each one a life that had been given back its pulse. He wore a pressed white shirt and a tie I had never seen before. When I asked where he got it, he said he had been saving it for a day that mattered. Tommy arrived at 7 sharp. His apron was already tied, his tools already laid in order on his bench. 4 months ago, this kid could not hold a screwdriver without shaking. Now his hands moved with a patience that reminded me of my father. He looked at me and nodded once. That nod said more than any speech could. Dolores had placed a small vase of yellow daisies on the reception counter. She adjusted them 3 times before she was satisfied. When I told her they looked fine the first time, she shook her head and said that first impressions only happen once. I did not argue with that. Nadia arrived at 8:15, 30 minutes before we unlocked the door. She wore a charcoal suit and carried a leather folder, but she did not open it. She walked through the workshop slowly, touching the edge of each bench, studying the tools hanging on their pegs, pausing at the window where the morning light fell across Tommy's station. She turned to me and said nothing for a long time. Then she said, "Your wife would have loved this room." I had told her about Eleanor only once, weeks ago during a late conversation about why I chose the name Second Hand. I had not expected her to remember. But Nadia Farouk was the kind of woman who filed every detail in a place where it would never be lost. At 8:45, I gathered everyone in the center of the workshop. Walter, Tommy, Dolores, and Nadia. 5 people standing in a room built for a purpose none of us had planned 12 weeks ago. I wanted to say something important, something about second chances and broken things and the courage it takes to keep ticking. But when I opened my mouth, all that came out was, "Let us do good work today." Walter said amen. Tommy smiled. Dolores adjusted her daisies one more time. We unlocked the front door at 9 o'clock. The first customer walked in at 9:14. Her name was Catherine Oakes, a retired school teacher with white hair pinned in a loose bun and a canvas bag pressed against her chest like she was protecting a child. She set the bag on the counter and pulled out a clock wrapped in a faded pillowcase. It was a Black Forest cuckoo clock, hand-carved, probably 1920s. The bird was missing one wing. The bellows were cracked. The chains hung limp and tangled like old necklaces forgotten in a drawer. She told me her husband had bought it in Germany during their honeymoon in 1961. He had died 2 years ago. Every repair shop she visited told her the same thing. Too old. Too damaged. Not worth the cost. She had almost thrown it away last Tuesday but could not bring herself to open the trash can lid. I held the clock in both hands and turned it slowly. The carvings were exquisite. Oak leaves and a stag, hand-chiseled with a confidence that does not exist in modern production. The movement inside was irregular, dirty but intact. The cuckoo bird sat crooked on its perch, one wing snapped clean at the shoulder. "I can fix this," I said. Her eyes filled. She did not cry. She simply stood there, holding the pillowcase against her stomach, and whispered. Everyone else said it was impossible. I set the clock on my bench and opened my kit. Tommy watched from his station, learning the way young people learn best, by seeing someone refuse to quit. I dismantled the movement piece by piece, cleaned each gear with naphtha and a soft brush, replaced the cracked bellows with new goatskin I had ordered from a supplier in Munich, carved a replacement wing from a block of linden wood using a template I traced from the surviving wing. The process took 4 hours and 11 minutes. I know because Walter timed it on his restored Waltham. When I wound the chains and pulled the minute hand to the hour, the bird emerged from its tiny door and called twice. Its new wing spread open like a small declaration of independence. Catherine Oakes covered her mouth with both hands. Then she laughed. It was the kind of laugh that comes after a long season of grief, sudden and fragile and bright, as glass breaking in reverse. She paid $180. I tried to charge less. She refused. She said that the people who told her it was impossible had charged her nothing, and that was exactly what their advice had been worth. By noon we had taken in 6 more pieces. A grandfather clock with a split pendulum rod, a French carriage clock with a stripped winding stem, a 1950s Bulova wristwatch with a hairspring bent into a shape that made Tommy wince, an Art Deco mantel clock missing its escapement wheel, a ship's bell clock from a retired Navy captain who drove 40 minutes from Hilton Head, and a simple kitchen wall clock brought in by a young mother who said her daughter fell asleep every night to its ticking and had not slept properly since it stopped. I fixed the kitchen clock first. It took 22 minutes. When the young mother heard the tick resume, she closed her eyes and whispered, "Thank God." She did not mean it casually. Walter handled the intake paperwork for every customer, writing descriptions in a careful, slanted hand that belonged to another century. Tommy assisted me on the carriage clock, holding the movement steady while I extracted the stripped stem. His fingers did not shake once. Dolores answered the phone 11 times before lunch and scheduled 4 appointments for the following week. By 5 o'clock, when I turned the sign to closed, I sat alone in the workshop. The others had gone home. The room was quiet, except for the ticking. 12 display clocks, 6 new arrivals waiting on the bench, 18 heartbeats filling a room that 3 months ago had been an empty shell with cracked plaster and dead silence. I pulled Eleanor's photograph from my breast pocket. The one from our wedding day, 1979. Her veil caught by the wind, her smile wider than the frame could hold. I held it near the window, where the fading Savannah light came through the glass, the same shade of gold as her hair. "We opened today," I told her. "You should see Tommy's hands. You should see Walter in that tie." The pendulum clock on the wall ticked once. Then again. I put the photograph back in my pocket, picked up a small brush, and began cleaning the Bulova's hairspring under the lamp. There was still so much work to do, and for the first time in a very long time, that thought did not frighten me. It felt like a promise. Within 6 weeks, Secondhand had more work than 4 people could handle. The phone rang before we opened, and kept ringing after we closed. Dolores started a waiting list on a yellow legal pad that grew to 3 pages, then 5, then 9. She began turning away walk-ins with an apology and a number to call back in 2 weeks. I told her that felt wrong, turning people away. She looked at me over her reading glasses and said, "Arthur, you cannot fix every clock in Georgia by Friday." She was right. But I wanted to try. The word spread the way good things sometimes do, not through advertising or strategy, but through kitchen tables and church pews and phone calls between old friends. Catherine Oakes told her book club. The book club told the Historical Society. The Historical Society told the Savannah Morning News. A reporter named Daniel Marsh called on a Tuesday afternoon and asked if he could visit. I said yes without thinking. The way you agree to something before you understand what it will become. Daniel arrived on Thursday with a photographer named Lisa. He was young, maybe 30, with a notebook that he filled in a handwriting so small it looked like ants marching across the page. He sat on a stool in the corner of the workshop for 5 hours. He watched me replace an escapement wheel on an 1865 Vienna regulator. He watched Tommy polish a set of brass gears until they glowed like small suns. He watched Walter greet a customer, a trembling woman carrying her late mother's mantel clock, and hold her hand for a full minute before he said a single word about paperwork. Daniel asked me questions I had not expected. Not about business or revenue or square footage. He asked what sound I heard when I woke up in the morning. I told him I heard ticking. He asked what that sound meant to me. I told him it meant that something I touched was still alive. The article ran the following Sunday. Front page of the Metro section. The headline read, "The Man Who Gives Time Back." Lisa's photograph showed my hands inside the Vienna regulator, the gears visible between my fingers. The morning light catching the brass like a small fire. Below it, a second photograph showed Tommy at his bench, leaning forward with a loop in his eye. His face so focused, it looked like prayer. I did not expect what happened next. By Monday morning, the phone had rung 47 times before 9 o'clock. Dolores stopped counting after that. Emails arrived from addresses in Atlanta, Jacksonville, Charlotte, and Nashville. A woman in Knoxville sent a message saying she had driven past 4 repair shops to reach us, because none of them understood what a clock meant to a person who had lost someone. A retired colonel from Fort Stewart brought in a ship's chronometer that had not run since 1953 and said he trusted no one else to touch it. A couple from Charleston carried in a long case clock that had been in their family for 7 generations and asked if I could make it sing again. I said yes to all of them. Tommy said I was going to kill myself. I told him that dying while fixing clocks was not the worst way to go. Revenue in our first full month reached $22,000. Nadia reviewed the numbers on a Saturday morning, sitting at Dolores's desk with a cup of tea that she held but never drank. She circled the total with a red pen and looked at me. "You are ahead of projection by 40%, she said. I did not know what to say to that. Numbers had never been my language. I understood time, not money. But I understood that $22,000 meant we could pay Walter and Tommy and Dolores on schedule. It meant the lights stayed on. It meant the lease was covered. And it meant that Nadia's $450,000 investment had started to breathe. The second month was stronger, $31,000. The third month, $38,000. We hired 2 new apprentices from Hope House. Marcus, a 44-year-old electrician who had lost his contractor's license after a DUI and had been sleeping in his truck for 6 months, and Priya, a 26-year-old engineering dropout who had left college after a breakdown and found her way to Gloria's door the same week I did. Marcus had hands built for wiring, which translated naturally to soldering. Priya had a mathematical mind that understood gear ratios the way poets understand rhythm. I trained them the same way I trained Tommy. Slowly, patiently, with no room for shortcuts and no tolerance for carelessness. By the 4th month, our monthly revenue crossed $45,000. The waiting list ran to 6 weeks. We had restored over 200 pieces: grandfather clocks, pocket watches, cuckoo clocks, ship chronometers, tower clock movements, music boxes, even a 19th century automaton that played a tiny violin when you wound the key. Each one left the workshop ticking. Each one went home to someone who stood in the doorway and listened to it like a heartbeat returning from the dead. Nadia called a meeting on a Thursday evening. She brought her leather folder, the one she had carried on opening day. She opened it and placed a single sheet of paper on my bench. "The Savannah Business Journal wants to feature secondhand in their October issue," she said. "And I have received 3 inquiries from investors in Atlanta who want to discuss expansion." I looked at the paper. Then I looked at the workshop, at the tools on their pegs, at the 6 clocks waiting on the bench, at the lamp above my station, still warm from 12 hours of work. "I did not start this to expand," I said. Nadia nodded. "I know. But Arthur, you need to understand something. What you built here is no longer just a workshop. It is a story. And stories, once they begin to travel, do not ask your permission to grow." I thought about that for a long time after she left. I sat in the workshop with the lights off, listening to the ticking, 30 clocks on the walls and shelves, each one breathing at its own pace. Each one a rhythm I had restored with my own hands. The sound filled the dark like a choir singing in whispers. Somewhere north of here, in a city I had not visited since the night I left, my son was building something too. I did not know what. I did not want to know. But the world is smaller than we pretend. And stories, as Nadia said, travel without permission. I would learn the truth about Ethan soon enough. And when I did, the ticking in this room would not sound the same. The truth about Ethan arrived on a Wednesday, the way most unwelcome things do, without warning and dressed in ordinary clothes. I was at my bench, replacing a broken balance staff on a 1942 Hamilton military watch, when Dolores set a newspaper on the corner of my workstation. She did not say anything. She simply placed it there, tapped the page twice with her index finger, and walked back to the front desk. Dolores had a gift for delivering difficult news without a single word. The article was in the business section of the Charleston Post and Courier, page 6. A short column, maybe 400 words. Under the headline, "Brennan Timepieces faces multiple lawsuits over counterfeit claims." There was a photograph of Ethan standing outside a storefront I did not recognize. He wore a suit that looked expensive and a smile that looked borrowed. Behind him, the sign read "Brennan Timepieces" in chrome letters that reflected the Carolina sun like a lie catching the light. I read the article 3 times. Each time, new details surfaced like objects appearing in water as it clears. Ethan had opened Brennan Timepieces 14 months ago, 6 months after he put $500 in my hand and told me to leave. The business model was simple and, as I would learn, fundamentally dishonest. He purchased mass-produced quartz watches from factories in Shenzhen, replaced the dials with faces engraved Brennan in an old-fashioned serif font, fitted them into polished steel cases, and sold them online as heritage-crafted American timepieces at prices ranging from $800 to $3,000 each. He used my name. He used our family name. He used the word heritage as if it were something you could manufacture in a shipping container. The business had grown fast. According to the article, Brennan Timepieces had generated nearly $1.2 million in revenue in its first year. Ethan had opened a second location in Wilmington and a third in Richmond. He had hired a marketing firm that built a website filled with sepia-toned photographs and words like tradition and generational craft and hand-assembled with care. None of it was true. The watches were assembled by machine. The movements were generic. The only thing handmade about the entire operation was the signature Ethan placed on each certificate of authenticity, a document that authenticated nothing. The lawsuits began when a jeweler in Charlotte purchased 6 pieces for his store, opened one, and found a movement identical to watches he could buy wholesale for $11. He posted his findings on a watch collector's forum. Within a week, the thread had 900 replies. Within a month, 3 class action lawsuits were filed in 2 states. The Federal Trade Commission opened an inquiry, and Brennan Timepieces, the company my son built on a name I had spent 46 years earning, was bleeding from wounds it had inflicted on itself. I set the newspaper down and stared at my hands. They were resting on the Hamilton's open caseback, the balance staff half installed, the tiny jewel bearing waiting in a pair of tweezers. My hands were steady. They had been steady since the day my father taught me to hold a movement without breathing too hard. But something behind my ribs was not steady at all. Tommy noticed. He always noticed. He set down his loop and walked to my bench without being asked. "You okay, Arthur?" I folded the newspaper and placed it in my toolbox drawer. "I will be." He stood there for a moment, the way people stand when they know a lie, but respect it enough not to call it one. Then, he went back to his station. I heard his tweezers click against metal. I heard Walter's wheelchair roll across the floor toward a customer. I heard Dolores answer the phone with the same warm greeting she used 400 times a week. The workshop kept moving. The clocks kept ticking. The world did not pause for my heartbreak. And I was grateful for that. That evening, after everyone left, I sat at my bench with the newspaper open again. I read the article a 4th time, then a 5th. I was not looking for new information. I was looking for something I knew I would not find. Some sentence, some phrase, some hint that my son had hesitated. That somewhere between the factory order and the forged certificate, he had paused and remembered his grandfather's hands, his mother's voice, the smell of brass and oil that had filled our home like a second language his entire childhood. There was no such sentence. There was no hesitation. Ethan had taken the family name and stripped it for parts, the same way a dishonest mechanic strips a stolen car. Efficiently. Completely. Without looking back, I closed the newspaper and opened my laptop, the one Nadia had given me when I told her I did not own a computer. I searched for Brennan Timepieces. The results filled the screen, like a wound splitting open. Consumer complaints. Forum threads with titles like Brennan Scam and Do Not Buy. A video by a watch reviewer with 600,000 subscribers who disassembled a Brennan watch on camera, held up the $11 movement, and said, "This is what happens when someone sells you a name instead of a craft." The reviewer did not know my name. He did not know me. But he was talking about me, about what Brennan was supposed to mean, and what my son had turned it into. I closed the laptop. The workshop was dark except for the desk lamp. 32 clocks ticked on the walls around me, each one a rhythm I had given back, each one proof that the name still meant something in this room, even if it had been gutted in another. I picked up the phone and dialed Nadia's number. She answered on the second ring, as if she had been waiting. "I need to know everything," I said. "Every lawsuit. Every dollar. Every debt he owes." There was a pause. Then Nadia said, "I already started. Come to my office tomorrow morning. 8 o'clock. I hung up and sat in the dark for a long time. Listening to 32 clocks marked the seconds of a night that would change everything that came after it. Nadia's office occupied the second floor of a restored cotton warehouse on River Street, a building that smelled of old wood and new money. I arrived at 7:55. She was already seated behind a mahogany desk that could have held a small country's worth of paperwork, but held only 2 items. A manila folder, thick enough to stand on its own, and a cup of tea she had not touched. She gestured to the chair across from her. I sat. She opened the folder. "Your son owes $2.1 million, she said. The number landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. 1.3 million in legal settlements and fines, 400,000 in unpaid vendor invoices, 260,000 in back rent across 3 locations, and the remainder in credit lines he maxed out trying to keep the doors open after the lawsuits hit." I said nothing. I let the numbers sit. Nadia turned a page. The Richmond location closed in March. Wilmington closed 2 weeks ago. The Charleston flagship is still open, but the landlord has filed for eviction. He has 30 days. She paused and looked at me over the rim of her glasses. Ethan has also not paid his employees in 6 weeks. 4 of them have filed complaints with the Department of Labor. I thought about the people who worked for my son. People who had shown up every morning trusting that the name on their paycheck meant something. People who had been lied to the same way every customer had been lied to. The same way I had been lied to when Ethan looked me in the eye and called my craft dead. "How do you know all of this?" I asked. Nadia closed the folder. She placed both hands flat on the desk, fingers spread, the way someone does when they are preparing to hold the weight of something heavy. "Because I have been watching him since before you arrived in Savannah." The room changed. The light did not shift. The walls did not move. But something between us tilted, the way a clock tilts when a gear slips out of alignment, just enough to make the tick uneven. "Nadia, let me finish." Her voice was steady but thin, like a wire pulled taut. "I was 23 years old when I met Eleanor. We worked together at a small auction house in New York, cataloging estate jewelry. Your wife was the kindest person I had ever known, and I was young and careless and a long way from home." She picked up her teacup, held it without drinking, and set it back down. "I had a brief relationship with a man during that time. It lasted 4 months. He was charming and unreliable, and completely wrong for me. When I discovered I was pregnant, I panicked. I was not ready. I had no family in this country. My father in Cairo would have disowned me. Eleanor was the only person I told. I felt the words coming before she said them. The way you feel a clock's chime building in the seconds before it strikes. Eleanor offered to raise the child. She and her husband, a young watchmaker in Charleston, had been trying for 2 years without success. She said the child would be loved. She said he would have a family. She said he would never want for anything. Nadia looked at me. Her eyes were dry, but full in a way that dry eyes should not be. "Arthur, Ethan is my biological son." I did not move. I did not breathe. The sentence entered my chest like a key, turning a lock that had been rusted shut for decades. Eleanor's deathbed confession, the way she had grabbed my wrist and whispered, "Ethan is not yours by blood." I had carried that secret for over a year, pressing it down into a place where I hoped it would dissolve. But secrets do not dissolve. They wait. "Eleanor told me," I said. Nadia's composure cracked. Not dramatically. Not like glass shattering. More like a hairline fracture spreading across porcelain, visible only if you knew where to look. "She told you?" "On her last night. She made me promise to keep it to myself. She said it did not matter. She said he was our son, regardless." Nadia pressed her fingers against her eyes. She held them there for 10 seconds. When she removed them, she was herself again, collected, precise, present. But I had seen the fracture. I would not forget it. "I gave him up because I believed it was the right thing," she said. "I watched from a distance. I built my career. I told myself that staying away was the most responsible choice. But when I read about your shop in the newspaper, when I saw your name, Brennan, I knew. And when I walked into your workshop and watched you restore that Fusey movement, I was not evaluating an investment, Arthur. I was watching the man who raised my child. The room was silent except for a clock on her bookshelf, a small French carriage piece with a silver case. It ticked with the precision of something that had been recently serviced. I wondered if she had bought it thinking of me. Does Ethan know? I asked. No. And I am not sure he should. Not yet. I stood and walked to the window. River Street below was waking up. Tourists drifting toward the candy shops. A freight ship moving slowly up the Savannah River, like a tired animal heading home. I watched it for a long time. You invested $450,000 in my workshop, I said without turning around. Was any of that about the business? All of it was about the business. And all of it was about him. Both things can be true. I turned back to face her. She sat behind that desk, straight-backed, hands folded. The folder between us like a border neither of us had fully crossed. She was not asking for forgiveness. She was not asking for anything. She was simply telling the truth. The way you tell the truth when you have carried it long enough that the weight has reshaped your bones. I want to buy his debt, I said. Nadia opened the folder again. I thought you might. I have already contacted the primary creditors. At the current default rate, the total portfolio can be acquired for approximately $1.2 million. 60 cents on the dollar. Can we afford it? Secondhand cannot. But I can. And I will. On one condition. Namit. When the time comes, you let me be in the room. I looked at the carriage clock on her shelf. Its tick was perfect. Not a fraction fast, not a fraction slow. Like a heart that had learned, through years of discipline, to beat without trembling. When the time comes, I said, you will be in the room. The acquisition took 11 days. Nadia handled it the way she handled everything. With precision, silence, and a patience that made other people nervous. She began with the largest creditor, a commercial lender in Charlotte, that held $760,000 of Ethan's debt. They had already written it down on their books, classified it as unlikely to recover, and assigned it to a collections agency that had made exactly zero progress in 3 months. Nadia offered $456,000. Cash. 48-hour closing. No contingencies. They accepted before lunch. The vendor invoices were simpler. 14 suppliers across 3 states. Each one owed between $8,000 and $42,000. Most of them had already given up. One fabric supplier in Wilmington told Nadia on the phone that he would sell his receivable for 30 cents on the dollar just to stop thinking about it. She paid him 40 because she said a man's frustration should not be used to lower his price. That sentence told me more about Nadia Farouk than a biography ever could. The back rent was handled through 2 landlords. The Charleston property owner, a man named Gerald Pace, was the most difficult. He did not want to sell the debt. He wanted Ethan physically removed from his building and his name erased from the lease. Nadia met him for dinner at a restaurant on King Street and spent 2 hours listening to him describe every late payment, every unanswered phone call, every broken promise my son had made over 14 months. She did not interrupt once. When Gerald finished, she said, I understand your frustration. I am offering to take this problem off your desk permanently. He signed the assignment agreement the next morning. By day 11, Nadia held the full portfolio. $2.1 million in claims. Acquired for $1.18 million. She placed the documents in a fireproof safe in her office and gave me the combination. 4 numbers. Eleanor's birthday. I did not ask how she knew it. Some questions answer themselves. I spent those 11 days doing what I had always done. Working. Fixing clocks. Training Marcus on mainspring replacement. Teaching Priya how to read the wear patterns on a pivot hole to determine whether a bushing needed to be installed or whether a simple polish would restore the tolerance. I kept my hands busy because my mind would not stay still. At night, alone in my small apartment above the workshop, I sat with Eleanor's photograph and talked to her. I told her what Nadia had revealed. I told her that I understood now why she had cried on certain nights when Ethan was small, nights when I had assumed her tears were about exhaustion or worry, but were really about a secret she carried like a stone sewn into the lining of her coat. I told her I was not angry. That was the truth. I had moved through anger months ago, on a Greyhound bus in the rain, clutching $500 and a suitcase. Anger was a town I had already passed through. I was living somewhere else now, a place quieter and more complicated, where forgiveness and strategy occupied the same room without speaking to each other. Walter noticed the change in me before anyone else. He rolled his wheelchair to my bench one afternoon and sat there for a full minute without speaking. Walter had a veteran's sense for when a man was carrying operational weight, the kind of burden that does not show in the body but changes the air around a person. "You found out something about your boy," he said. It was not a question. "Yes." "Is it bad?" "It is complicated." Walter nodded. He reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out the Waltham pocket watch I had restored for him on my third day at Hope House. He held it to his ear, listened to the tick, and then held it to mine. The sound was clean and steady, a tiny heartbeat that had survived a century of silence. "When I came back from Vietnam," he said, "my son did not recognize me. I had been gone 2 years and he was 4 years old, and he hid behind his mother's leg and cried when I tried to pick him up. Took me 6 months to earn his trust back. 6 months of sitting on the floor, playing with toy trucks, not rushing, not forcing, just being there." He put the watch back in his pocket. "Whatever your boy did, he is still your boy. And whatever you are planning, make sure there is a door in it he can walk through, even if he does not deserve the door, especially if he does not deserve it." I looked at Walter Briggs, 73 years old, both legs gone below the knee from a roadside bomb, in a war that most Americans had tried to forget. A man who had lived in a shelter, eaten meals cooked by strangers, and kept his father's broken watch pressed against his heart for 30 years, waiting for someone to make it tick again. He had more wisdom in his damaged body than most people accumulate in a lifetime of comfort. "There will be a door," I said. He nodded once and rolled back to his station. The Waltham ticked in his pocket, faint but certain, the way all true things sound when you hold them close enough to hear. That Friday, Nadia called me at 6 in the evening. Her voice carried the particular calm that meant something important was about to happen. "The Charleston landlord served the final eviction notice this morning," she said. "Ethan has 14 days to vacate. His remaining employees have quit. He is alone in the building." I stood at my bench. The workshop was empty. The clocks ticked around me like a congregation waiting for a sermon. "It is time," I said. "I will book 2 train tickets to Charleston." Saturday morning. I hung up and placed my hands flat on the bench, fingers spread. The same gesture I had seen Nadia make when she prepared to carry something heavy. The oak was smooth and warm from years of work. I could feel every hour I had spent at this bench, every gear I had cleaned, every spring I had wound, every broken thing I had made whole. Tomorrow I would face my son, not as a victim, not as a father begging for acknowledgement, but as a man who had rebuilt himself from $500 and a suitcase, and who now held every second of his son's future in a fireproof safe on River Street. The clocks ticked. I listened, and I began to plan what I would say. When Ethan Brennan looked up and saw the father he had thrown away standing in his doorway, holding 2.1 million reasons to pay attention. The train to Charleston left Savannah at 7:12 on a Saturday morning. Nadia sat across from me in the quiet car, her leather folder on the seat beside her, her hands resting in her lap like 2 birds that had agreed not to fly. She wore a dark blue dress and no jewelry except a single gold chain, so thin it was nearly invisible against her collarbone. She looked the way a person looks when they have rehearsed a conversation 1,000 times and still do not know how it will begin. I had not slept. I had spent the night at my bench, Not working, just sitting, listening to the clocks. 34 of them now, each one ticking at its own tempo, each one a small declaration that time does not stop for doubt or fear or the distance between a father and his son. At 3 in the morning I had taken out my restoration kit and opened it on the bench. My father's tools lay in their velvet grooves. The brass polishing cloth, the set of screwdrivers with handles worn smooth by 3 generations of Brennan hands, the jeweler's loop with a scratch on the rim that my father said came from dropping it during an earthquake that turned out to be a truck passing too close to his shop in 1954. I touched each tool the way a man touches a rosary before a difficult prayer. The train arrived in Charleston at 8:41. We took a taxi to King Street. The morning was warm and bright, the kind of spring day that makes a city look like a painting of itself. Tourists were already walking with coffee cups and shopping bags, unaware that 2 blocks north, a man's life was about to change in a room that smelled of failure. The storefront was smaller than I expected. Brennan timepieces occupied a narrow space between a women's clothing boutique and a bakery that filled the sidewalk with the scent of fresh sourdough. The chrome letters on the sign were still polished, still catching the light. But the display window told a different story. 3 watches sat on dusty velvet. A 4th display stand was empty, knocked on its side. A small crack ran through the lower left corner of the glass like a river on a map leading nowhere. The door was unlocked. We stepped inside. The showroom was dim. Half the overhead lights had been turned off, either to save electricity or because the bulbs had died and no one had bothered to replace them. Glass display cases lined both walls, most of them half empty. A few watches remained, sitting in their polished cases, like abandoned children dressed for a party that had been canceled. The air smelled of cardboard and carpet cleaner, and something else, something harder to name. Defeat, maybe, or the particular stillness that fills a room when a person has stopped trying. Ethan was in the back office. I heard him before I saw him. The sound of a keyboard, clicking in short bursts. The kind of typing a person does when they are writing emails they know will not be answered. Nadia and I walked through the showroom without speaking. Our footsteps were the loudest sound in the building. He was sitting behind a desk covered in paper. Invoices. Legal notices. A laptop open to a spreadsheet filled with red numbers. He wore a wrinkled dress shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, and his hair was longer than I remembered, uncombed, curling at the collar. He looked thinner. He looked older. He looked like a man who had been running from something and had finally stopped. Not because he chose to, but because there was nowhere left to go. He looked up. The expression that crossed his face moved through 5 stages in less than 2 seconds. Confusion, recognition, disbelief, shame, and then something harder. A mask sliding into place. The defensive reflex of a man who has been caught and does not yet know how badly. Dad? The word hit me in the chest. He had not called me that in over a year. The last word he had used was burden. The word before that was dead, as in your craft is dead. But now, in this dim room filled with the evidence of his own failure, the first word that came out of his mouth was the one that mattered most. Hello, Ethan. He stood. His eyes moved from me to Nadia and back. He did not recognize her. Why would he? He had never met the woman who gave birth to him. He saw only a stranger in a blue dress, standing next to a father he had discarded. What are you doing here? His voice was careful, guarded. The voice of a man scanning for threats. I pulled a chair from the corner of the room and sat down across from his desk. Nadia remained standing near the door, her folder held against her chest like a shield. I looked at my son, at the dark circles beneath his eyes, at the stack of legal notices on his desk, at the empty coffee cup with a brown ring dried at the bottom, at the man he had become in the 14 months since he handed me $500 and told me to disappear. I know about the lawsuits, I said. I know about the FTC inquiry. I know about Wilmington and Richmond. I know your employees quit. And I know you owe $2.1 million to people who have stopped believing you will ever pay them back. Ethan's jaw tightened. His fingers gripped the edge of the desk. How do you know that? Because I own it. All of it. Every dollar you owe now belongs to me. The room went silent, not the comfortable silence of a workshop at night, surrounded by ticking clocks. This was the silence of a man realizing that the ground beneath him has shifted, and that the person standing at the edge is not there to watch him fall. Ethan sat down slowly. His chair creaked. He stared at me, the way a person stares at something they cannot yet make sense of. A word in a foreign language. A shadow in the wrong place. A father who was supposed to be gone, but is instead sitting across the desk holding the deed to your destruction. That is not possible, he whispered. And yet here we are. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a watch. Not an expensive watch. Not a rare or antique or valuable watch. A simple kitchen clock, round, white-faced, with black numbers and a second hand that swept in a steady circle. I had taken it from the workshop that morning. I placed it on his desk between the invoices and the laptop. Its tick filled the room like a pulse. Steady, unhurried, indifferent to the catastrophe surrounding it. I am going to give you two choices, I said. And you are going to listen to both of them before you speak. Ethan stared at the clock on his desk. Its second hand moved in a circle so steady, it seemed to mock every spinning thought behind his eyes. He opened his mouth, then closed it. I waited. A man who has spent 46 years listening to the insides of broken clocks knows how to wait. Choice one, I said. I enforce the debt. Every dollar. Every lawsuit. Every lien. The creditors I purchased these claims from were tired. I am not. I will pursue full legal recovery. Your remaining assets will be seized. This storefront will close within 14 days. Your credit will be destroyed for a decade. And the name Brennan, the name your mother and I gave you, the name your grandfather built with his hands in a shop no bigger than this room, will be permanently associated with fraud in every search engine, every court record, and every watch forum on the internet. I paused. The kitchen clock ticked. You will lose everything. And you will deserve it. Ethan's face had gone pale. Not the dramatic pale of a man in a movie. The real pale. The kind that starts at the lips and moves outward, the color draining slowly, like water leaving a cracked vase. His hands lay flat on the desk, and I noticed they were trembling. Not the way Tommy's hands used to tremble, from chemicals and withdrawal. This was different. This was the tremor of a man watching the last wall between himself and consequences dissolve. Choice. 2. I said. And my voice softened without my permission. You close this shop. You walk away from every counterfeit watch, every forged certificate, every lie you stamped with our family name. You come to Savannah. You move into the small apartment above the workshop, the same apartment I slept in when I had nothing. And you apprentice under me for 1 full year. Ethan blinked. His mouth opened again. I am not finished, I said. During that year, you will earn $12 an hour. You will sweep the floors. You will clean the tools. You will learn to disassemble a movement and reassemble it without leaving a single scratch. You will sit at a bench for 10 hours a day and do the work that your grandfather did, that I did, that you once told me was dead. You will not manage. You will not delegate. You will not sell. You will work with your hands until they understand what this family's name was supposed to mean. I leaned forward. At the end of that year, if you have earned it, I will forgive the full debt. Every dollar. And I will give you one of the locations to reopen under your own name. A real business this time, built on real craft. But if you quit before the year is up, even by 1 day, Choice 1 activates automatically. No negotiation. No extension. No second chances. For the second chance. The room held its breath. The kitchen clock ticked 11 times before Ethan spoke. Why? One word. But it carried the weight of everything between us. Every unanswered phone call from the shelter. Every night, I spent listening to clocks instead of my son's voice. Every morning I woke in a room that was not my home and reminded myself that the man who put me there was the same boy I had taught to tie his shoes, ride a bicycle, and read the time on his grandfather's pocket watch when he was 4 years old. "Because your mother asked me to take care of you," I said. "And I do not break promises to Eleanor." Ethan's eyes filled. He pressed his palms against them, the way Nadia had pressed her fingers against her own eyes 2 weeks ago in her office. The same gesture, the same attempt to hold the self together when the self is threatening to come apart. I had never noticed it before, how a child can carry the mannerisms of a parent they have never met. Biology moves through people like water through stone, invisible until you see the shape it has carved. Nadia stepped forward. She had been standing near the door for the entire conversation, silent as a clock with its pendulum removed. She placed her leather folder on the desk, next to the kitchen clock, and opened it. Inside were the assignment agreements, the creditor releases, and a single-page apprenticeship contract she had drafted with an attorney in Savannah. Clean. Simple. 1 year. $12 an hour. Full debt forgiveness upon completion. Automatic enforcement upon default. "This is real," she said. Her voice was steady, but carried something underneath it, a current running below the surface that only I could hear. "Every document is executed. Every creditor has been paid. The debt belongs to your father, and this offer will not be repeated." Ethan looked at Nadia for the first time. Truly looked at her. I watched his eyes move across her face, the way a person studies a painting they feel they have seen before, but cannot place. He did not know her. He could not know her, but something in the architecture of her cheekbones, the set of her jaw, the way she held her hands at her sides, with the fingers slightly curled, must have registered in some cellular place beneath conscious recognition. He stared at her for 5 full seconds before he turned back to me. "Who is she?" he asked. "Someone who believes you are worth saving," I said. "That is all you need to know right now." Ethan looked at the contract. He looked at the clock, ticking on his desk. He looked at the showroom through the open office door. The half-empty cases, the cracked window, the chrome letters outside still catching the light of a reputation he had counterfeited and spent. Then he looked at his own hands, the hands that had signed fraudulent certificates, the hands that had counted money, earned from lies, the hands that had placed $500 on a dinner table and told his father to be gone by morning. He picked up the pen Nadia had placed beside the contract. "I do not deserve this," he said. "No," I said. "You do not." He signed. The pen made a small sound against the paper, no louder than a gear clicking into place. But I heard it the way I hear every mechanism I have ever repaired, with my whole body, with the part of me that understands that the difference between broken and working is sometimes nothing more than a single component finding the courage to move. I reached across the desk and picked up the kitchen clock. I turned it over, opened the battery cover, and removed the battery. The ticking stopped. The room went completely silent. "Your old time is finished," I said. I placed the silent clock in his hands. "When you are ready to earn a new one, you will build it yourself." Ethan held the clock against his chest. He did not speak. He did not need to. Some silences are louder than any confession, and this one filled the room the way a bell fills a cathedral, not with sound, but with the trembling air that follows it. Ethan arrived in Savannah on a Tuesday evening, with one suitcase and a face that looked like it had been arguing with itself for the entire train ride. I met him at the station. We did not hug. We did not shake hands. We walked to the workshop in a silence that was not hostile but not comfortable either. The kind of silence that exists between two people who both know that words are not yet strong enough to hold what needs to be said. I showed him the apartment above the workshop. It was small, a single bed, a dresser, a bathroom, with a shower that took 40 seconds to turn warm, and a window that looked out onto the alley behind the building. No television, no desk, just a room with walls and a ceiling and the constant sound of ticking rising through the floorboards from the workshop below. Ethan set his suitcase on the bed and looked around. I watched his eyes measure the space. I knew what he was thinking. He was thinking that this room was smaller than the office he had just abandoned, smaller than the bedroom he had taken from me, smaller than every assumption he had ever made about the size a life required to be worth living. "You start tomorrow at 7, I said. "Do not be late." He was not late. He was early. I came downstairs at 6:45 and found him standing at the workshop door in a plain white shirt, dark jeans, and shoes that had never touched a workshop floor. His hands were in his pockets. He looked like a man waiting outside a courtroom. I handed him a broom. He looked at it the way a surgeon might look at a mop. I did not explain. I did not justify. I pointed to the floor and walked to my bench. Behind me I heard the first hesitant strokes of bristles against hardwood. The sound was uneven, arrhythmic, the sweeping of a man who had never been asked to clean up after himself. Walter arrived at 7:15. He rolled through the front door, saw Ethan with the broom, and stopped. He looked at me. I gave him a small nod. Walter said nothing. He rolled to his station, opened his drawer, and began organizing his tools with the deliberate calm of a man who understood that some situations require observation before opinion. Tommy arrived at 7:30. He saw Ethan, and his entire body stiffened. Tommy knew the story. Everyone in the workshop knew the story. They knew about the $500. They knew about the eviction. They knew that the man now sweeping their floor was the same man who had called their mentor a burden and thrown him out of his own home. Tommy looked at me with a question in his eyes. I answered it without speaking. My face said, "Give him the same chance this place gave you." Tommy exhaled. He tied his apron and went to his bench. But I noticed that his jaw stayed tight for the rest of the morning. Ethan swept for 3 hours. The workshop floor, the front entrance, the bathroom, the storage room. When he finished, I handed him a cloth and a bottle of brass polish and pointed to the display case. He polished 12 clock cases without a word. His strokes were clumsy at first. Too much pressure, too little patience. By the 5th clock, he had found a rhythm. Not a good rhythm, but a rhythm. That was enough for the first day. At noon, I called him to my bench. I placed a broken pocket watch in front of him. A simple piece, an Ingersoll from the 1920s. The kind of watch a working man carried in his vest. The mainspring was snapped. The crystal was cracked. The dial was stained with age. "Open it," I said. He picked up a case knife and tried to pry the back off. He used too much force. The knife slipped and scratched the case. He flinched. "Again," I said. He tried again. This time slower. The back popped off with a soft click. He stared at the movement inside. A tiny universe of gears and springs and jewels no larger than grains of sand. I watched his face change. Not dramatically, not in the way faces change in stories. It was a small shift, a narrowing of the eyes, a slight parting of the lips. The expression of a man seeing something for the first time that he had been looking at his entire life without understanding. "This is what our name was supposed to protect," I said. He did not answer. But he did not look away either. The first week was brutal. Ethan's hands were soft. He had spent years typing on keyboards and signing documents and shaking hands in showrooms. He had never held a file for 6 hours. He had never used tweezers to position a hairspring. By Wednesday, his fingertips were raw. By Thursday, he had a blister on his right index finger that he tried to hide by wrapping it in a piece of electrical tape. I saw it. I said nothing. A blister earned at a workbench is a lesson that no lecture can deliver. Dolores was the first to speak to him outside of work. On Friday afternoon, she placed a cup of coffee on the edge of his station and said, "You take it black, right?" Ethan looked at her, startled by the small kindness. He nodded. She walked away without another word. But that cup of coffee was a door. The kind Walter had told me to build. and Dolores had opened it 6 inches without anyone asking her to. Marcus and Priya kept their distance. They were polite, but guarded. Marcus had spent 6 months sleeping in his truck after losing everything to one bad decision. He looked at Ethan and saw a man who had made far worse decisions and still had a father willing to catch him. The unfairness of that was not lost on Marcus, but he kept it to himself because Hope House had taught him that bitterness is a luxury that homeless people cannot afford. By the end of the 2nd week, Ethan could open a case back without scratching it. He could identify the basic components of a mechanical movement: the mainspring, the barrel, the gear train, the escapement, the balance wheel. He could name them. He could not yet fix them, but he could name them. And naming is the first act of respect. I watched him from my bench each evening as he cleaned his station before going upstairs. He wiped down every surface. He returned every tool to its peg. He swept his area one final time. And then he stood for a moment, looking at the workshop the way a man looks at a country he has just entered and does not yet understand but suspects he might one day call home. On the 14th night, I heard something through the ceiling of the workshop, a sound so quiet I almost missed it. Ethan was crying, not the loud, dramatic crying of a man performing remorse, the private, suffocated crying of a man who has finally stopped running and felt the full weight of everything he destroyed land on his chest at once. I did not go upstairs. Some repairs must happen in the dark, without an audience, without tools, without anyone telling you which part is broken. You have to find it yourself, and finding it is the only proof that you are ready to fix it. The months passed the way time passes inside a workshop, not by the calendar but by the work. You measure a week by the number of movements that crossed your bench. You measure a month by the progress of an apprentice's hands. And you measure a year by the moment you look at someone and realize they are no longer the person who walked through your door. Ethan's transformation did not happen in a single scene. It happened in small, daily surrenders. The first time he successfully replaced a mainspring without supervision was in his 7th week. A 1950s Elgin pocket watch, nothing rare, nothing valuable. But the mainspring had to be wound into the barrel with a tension that required equal parts strength and delicacy. He broke 2 springs before he seated the 3rd. When the barrel clicked shut and he wound the crown and the balance wheel began to swing, he looked at me with an expression I had not seen on his face since he was 9 years old and caught his first fish in Lake Marion. Pure, unguarded surprise at his own capability. I nodded once. That was all. He did not need applause. He needed confirmation that the work was real and that he had done it correctly. A nod was enough. By the 3rd month, he could service a basic mechanical watch from disassembly to reassembly. His hands had changed. The softness was gone, replaced by calluses on his fingertips and a steadiness that came not from natural talent, but from repetition. So relentless, it rewired his nervous system. He still made mistakes. He cross-threaded a case back on a customer's Omega and had to spend 2 hours carefully reversing the damage. He over-oiled a pivot and caused a movement to run 6 minutes fast per day. Each time, I made him fix his own error. I did not raise my voice. I did not lecture. I simply said, "Find it. Fix it. Do not repeat it." And he did. Tommy was the first team member to soften. It happened in the 4th month, during a lunch break. Ethan was sitting on the back steps eating a sandwich when Tommy sat down beside him without invitation. They did not speak for several minutes. Then Tommy said, "I used to shake so bad I could not hold a coffee cup. First month here. I dropped 3 movements. Arthur never yelled. He just handed me the next one." Ethan looked at him. "How did you stop shaking?" "I did not stop. I just started caring about something more than the shaking." Tommy stood up and went back inside. But from that day forward, he began leaving small things on Ethan's bench. A better set of tweezers, a loop with a cleaner lens, a handwritten note explaining the difference between a lever escapement and a cylinder escapement. with diagrams drawn in Tommy's careful, recovering hand. These were not gifts. They were permissions. Permissions to belong. Walter took longer. He watched Ethan for 5 months, without offering more than a good morning and a good night. Walter had fought in a war where trust was earned in blood, and he did not distribute it casually. But in the 6th month, he rolled his wheelchair to Ethan's bench one afternoon and placed his Waltham pocket watch on the velvet pad. "Clean it," he said. Ethan looked at me. I looked away. This was not my decision. Ethan picked up the watch with both hands. I knew he understood what he was holding. Everyone in the workshop knew the story of Walter's Waltham, the watch his father carried in Korea. The watch that had been silent for 30 years before I repaired it on my 3rd day at Hope House. It was not a timepiece. It was a reliquary, and Walter was placing it in the hands of a man he had every reason to distrust. Ethan cleaned it with a focus I had never seen from him. He removed the movement with surgical precision. He cleaned each gear with naphtha and a brush so soft it could have dusted a butterfly's wing. He polished the case with strokes so gentle they barely disturbed the patina. It took him 90 minutes. When he finished, he wound the crown and held the watch to his ear. The tick was clean. He handed it back to Walter. Walter held it to his own ear. He listened for 10 seconds. Then he looked at Ethan and said, "Your father fixed this watch when I had nothing. You just proved you are his son." Ethan's eyes filled. He blinked twice, hard, and turned back to his bench. Walter rolled away without another word, but something had shifted in the room. A gear that had been stuck for months, finally finding its position. And everyone felt it. Nadia visited the workshop every 2 weeks. She reviewed the books with Dolores, discussed expansion possibilities she knew I would decline, and spent exactly 15 minutes watching Ethan work from the far corner of the room. She never spoke to him. She never introduced herself beyond the brief encounter in Charleston. But I saw the way she studied his hands, the way her eyes traced the line of his jaw, the way she held her breath when he leaned forward under the lamp with the loupe pressed to his eye. She was watching her son learn the craft of the man who raised him, and the restraint it took to remain silent must have cost her something I could not calculate. In the 9th month, Ethan repaired his first complicated piece without assistance. A 1920s Patek Philippe pocket watch with a minute repeater mechanism, one of the most demanding complications in horology. The repeater had 2 hammers, 2 gongs, and a rack and snail system that translated the position of the hands into a sequence of chimes. 1 hammer for hours, both hammers for quarters, the second hammer alone for minutes. It required an understanding of mechanics so precise that most modern watchmakers send these pieces to specialists in Switzerland. Ethan worked on it for 3 weeks. He mapped every component in a notebook, drew exploded diagrams from memory, and rebuilt the rack and snail assembly 4 times before the chime sequence rang true. When he pressed the slide on the caseband and the watch chimed 9 hours, 2 quarters, and 7 minutes in a cascade of silver tones that filled the workshop like a tiny orchestra, every person in the room stopped what they were doing. Tommy set down his tools. Marcus looked up from his soldering iron. Priya turned from her calculator. Dolores stepped out from behind her desk. Walter rolled forward 2 feet, and Ethan sat at his bench, holding a watch that sang because his hands had learned to listen. And I saw my father in his posture, my wife in his patience, and something entirely his own in the way he closed his eyes and let the sound wash over him like a man standing in rain after a long drought. I did not speak. The chime said everything. The year ended on a Saturday. Not with fireworks or speeches or any of the dramatic gestures that stories use to mark their turning points. It ended with Ethan at his bench at 6:45 in the morning, 15 minutes before his shift, cleaning a set of tweezers he had already cleaned the night before. I stood in the doorway and watched him. His hands moved with the unconscious fluidity of a man who no longer thinks about what his hands are doing because his hands have become an extension of something deeper than thought. 365 days. He had not missed one. I walked to his station and placed a small wooden box on the velvet pad. maple, hand-sanded, with a brass clasp I had made from a scrap of grandfather clock metal. Inside, resting on dark velvet, was a pocket watch I had built from scratch over the past 3 months. Sterling silver case. White enamel dial with Roman numerals I had painted with a single hairbrush. A 17-jewel manual wind movement, with every wheel cut by hand. On the case back, 4 engraved words. Time forgives. Keep ticking. Ethan lifted the watch with both hands, the way I had taught him. Fingers underneath, thumbs free, no pressure on the crystal. He read the engraving. He read it again. Then he pressed the watch against his chest, and the tick passed through the silver and through his shirt and into the place where a heart either hardens or breaks open. Dad, I'm sorry. He had shown it in small ways all year. In the care he gave his station. In the respect he showed Walter. In the patience he offered every customer. But he had never said the words aloud. Not once. I think he was afraid they were not large enough to hold what he had done. He was right. They were not. But he said them anyway. Because sometimes the only honest thing you can offer is an apology you know is insufficient. I know, I said. You did the work, Ethan. Every hour. Every gear. Every mistake. That was yours. I placed the debt forgiveness agreement on the bench. $2.1 million released. I signed my line and handed him the pen. He signed without hesitation. The pen did not tremble. There is one more thing, I said. I opened the front door. Nadia stood on the sidewalk in the morning light, wearing a white blouse and the same thin gold chain from Charleston. She stepped inside. Ethan stood. He looked at her with that faint recognition he had never been able to name. Ethan, I said. This is Nadia Farouk. She funded this workshop. She purchased your debt. She made this year possible. And she is your biological mother. 36 clocks ticked on the walls. The silence between the ticks swallowed everything else. Nadia stood 3 feet from her son. She did not reach for him. She did not explain. She let him see her. I was 23, she said. Alone in a country that was not mine. Eleanor offered you a life I could not give. And she gave you a father who turned out to be the finest man I have ever known. Ethan looked at me. Then at Nadia. Then at the watch still ticking against his palm. The watch built by a father who had never stopped working. Not when his wife died. Not when his son betrayed him. Not when he slept in a shelter with $500 and a suitcase and a promise made to a woman on her last night alive. He stepped forward and put his arms around Nadia. She made a sound older than language. The sound a body makes when it finally touches something it has been reaching for across decades of distance and discipline and silent visits to a workshop where she watched her son's hands learn to heal broken things. Walter placed his hand on my arm and squeezed once. Tommy wiped his eyes with the back of his wrist. Dolores held her daisies and pretended she was not crying. That afternoon, I took Ethan to the storefront I had leased on Broughton Street. 3 blocks from second-hand. Workbenches built by the same carpenter. Warm spectrum lighting. A display case with black velvet. And on the wall behind the main bench, a framed photograph of Eleanor on her wedding day. This is yours, I said. One location. Real work. Your name. Earned. What should I call it, he asked. I thought about the $500 and the Greyhound and the shelter. About Catherine Oakes and Walter's Waltham. And a kitchen clock placed on a failing man's desk. About Nadia's 26-year silence and Tommy's steady hands and every broken thing that had crossed my bench and left it breathing. Call it what we are, I said. Secondhand. He understood. A used thing, given new purpose. A clock's thinnest arm, counting seconds others ignore. A father's hand, extended twice. 3 months later, Megan called from the hospital. A girl. 7 pounds, 4 ounces. They named her Eleanor. I took the train to Charleston that night. Ethan was standing in the hallway, holding a bundle so small it seemed impossible that it contained an entire future. He placed his daughter in my arms. Her eyes were closed. Her fingers curled around my index finger with a grip unreasonably strong for someone who had been alive 6 hours. I held her near the window, where evening light came through the glass. She had Eleanor's chin, Nadia's cheekbones, and hands that were already, I was certain, built for delicate and important work. "Welcome to the family," I whispered. "We fix things here." Outside, the city moved on. Clocks ticked in 1,000 rooms, counting seconds that would become minutes, that would become years, that would become the stories we tell when someone asks what we did with our time. And in a small workshop in Savannah, 36 clocks ticked on the walls. Each one had been broken. Each one had been opened, examined, repaired, and returned to the world with a rhythm it had forgotten it possessed. That is what we do. We take what time has damaged, we hold it in steady hands, we find the broken part, and we give it back its voice. Second hand, second chance, same heartbeat.